Hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Indie Game Movement, the podcast that talks about the marketing and business of indie games. I'm Andrew Pappas. I'm going to be your host today, and we're going to be talking about the impact of QA on player experience. You know, games succeed or fail based on the experience players walk away with, and few disciplines shape that experience more than quality assurance. So in this episode, we're going to look beyond bug reports and test plans to uncover one of QA's most underrated strengths, communication and empathy. From UX and design discussions to player-focused problem solving, QA isn't just about finding issues. It's about connecting across teams to ensure the experience feels right for players where it matters most. So that's what we're going to be talking about right here today on Indie Game Movement. Hey everyone, and we're back, and today with us I have Francisca Butron. Did I nail that pronunciation right?
That's correct. Francisca Butron.
Excellent. With us today, Francisca, how is it going? I am so excited to have you here today. How are things? How's the weather? How are you?
Likewise. Okay, where do I start? Well, first of all, thank you for having me. I love that we actually I have to say that. I love that we met in person and that we got to connect on things like family life and stuff that we do for fun with our kids to survive the winter. You ask about the weather. The weather is brutal right now. If you ask me, it is minus 20 something degree today.
So that's, folks, minus 20 in Celsius is approximately minus like almost zero. Basically zero, I think, in Fahrenheit.
Probably. I don't know about Fahrenheit, but it's really, really cold.
It's cold.
Very cold. Well, I already told you, the audience may not know that, but I am based in Saint-Jérôme in Quebec. It's a town near Montreal. And usually in December, weather or the winter is pretty mild. But I don't know what happened this week that we got a cold wave. It's minus 20. It's just...
We're right there with you.
You too? Is it cold?
Because this morning it was negative 14.4 degrees Celsius, which is 6 degrees here. So it's cold.
No,
but we're warming up, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Well, but yes, as Francisca mentioned, we met at MIGS. I may have, think I shared, maybe not. I don't know. But I was speaking there at the conference, attending. Great. Highly recommend anyone who's listening, if you have a chance to go. I think it's second in the, they claim that it's second in the North America to, I think, GDC gaming conference, like gaming for a B2B conference there. And honestly, it's definitely smaller, but it's more intimate. Yeah. It's a nicer setting. It's very close, easy to get around. And Montreal is awesome and way more cost efficient than San Francisco. So I'm not trying to purposely plug here. It was my first time going, but MIGS was an awesome conference. They're doing great things there. So anyone who's interested, check it out. Right?
I agree with you. It was my first time attending MIGS as well.
Okay.
And I love that the way that you and I got to connect, we didn't speak about business at all. We were just talking about other things. And that I really appreciate that. I appreciate making meaningful connections during those events because, of course, they're nice, but they can be it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work to do. It's a lot of meetings. So I always appreciate to connect with people and talk about something else and get to know each other on a deeper level.
And that's exactly how I felt about this setting and why I said it's a little bit more intimate, meaning you can have those fun types of conversations. And look, here we are now having this conversation on the podcast, which we do need to get to. But before we do that, Francisca, please share a little bit about yourself, like what do you do? I have done such an informal introduction here today, but that's all right. What do you do? What's your company? Just give us a little bit of a background, please, and then I know we'll get right into this very important conversation.
Yes. I'll summarize it as best as I can. I've been on QA for over 16 years now. I started off as a Spanish linguistic tester. Then a lot has happened since then, right? I've done training. I've done a little bit of HR. I changed. Eventually, I changed industries, and I've learned a lot about QA, but from a different perspective, from the supply chain perspective, which is a little bit different, but it gave me some wisdom. And at the end, I also work at a development studio, did a lot of QA there, embedded within production. But eventually, where I am today I work at Hobwis. It's a video game testing company that focuses on UI, UX, and user experience. And to put it simple, I am a QA solutions advisor. So I do different things, but a simple way to put it is I'm a business developer at the commercial department. I grow business and I attend to industry events, etc. But it's an hybrid position. I still work a lot with our operations department. So part of the role is a lot about bringing in new clients, but my main focus is to advise them on QA. So whether I bring those new clients by myself or whether they come to us, our clients will express their needs and I will help them translate those needs into a QA plan. That's my role.
I absolutely love that because honestly, I think it's an area that a lot of us either don't know or focus on one over the other. And you have that bridge between like biz dev and then, at least in in your specific case, a QA plan. So operations related too. And I think that's so important because lots of times we focus on one or the other, or one is always a little scary, which I admit, I see it myself too with biz dev. So it's really great to, hear that side of things for you. And I know that's going to be an important part when we dive in a little bit more. But before we do, I'm just curious. I'm sure you're super busy between business development, going to conferences, and, somewhat advising and maybe in some capacity leading on these projects a little bit. What do you do when you do have some spare time? Because I imagine that might be limited.
Well, I am also a mother of young kids. So my spare time is, I wouldn't say almost non-existent, but I try to find ways of having fun while bonding with my kids. So, for example, I play video game mostly with my kids these days. I grew up as a gamer, but these days it's more with my kids. I try to go out. I like outdoors, so I try to go out as much as I can. I like drawing when we have a moment when it's too stressful, when I have a moment to myself. I like doing things like drawing, reading books, anything. That's mostly what I do these days.
Awesome. So I love that because, I mean, even with the limited time, you still push and make time to find all these other things, which is really important to do. So, well, appreciate you sharing that. And in light of that, we also want to get to know you a little bit more. And to do that, we're going to have you go through our Q Box round, which is just, a few random questions I prepared here today for you, Francisca. So
let's go.
Oh, she didn't even give me a chance to say it. So, all right, let's do it. What's the most helpful or impactful advice you have ever received?
Yes, I think one of the best quotes I have ever heard in my life is, if you have a problem and there is a solution, there's no need to worry. And if there is no solution, then there's no use worrying. I don't remember when I heard this piece of advice or the person who I heard it from, but when I did, it stuck with me forever. It doesn't mean that nothing bad is happening or that worries are imaginary. It's more about trying to make the best out of a situation, right? If you can, of course, because our energy is better spent on taking actions within the realm of what is possible, of course. Really, anything is better than getting stuck spiraling into anxiety. And there's that. And of course, if there is no solution at all, well, in that case, there is no use worrying because that will become extra suffering on top of the situation itself, right? So
yeah,
this is a piece of advice that it's all about resilience and teaches that the best things we can focus on are finding out what we can control, letting go of what we cannot control, and finding acceptance and ways to cope.
Yeah. Oh, I love that one. And you said it right there. It's about control, right? If you have control, there's no need to worry. If you don't have control, then don't worry about something you can't control anyways, right? So such great advice. And it's funny. I've been reading some stuff recently, and that's been surfacing a lot. And I'm like, oh, it's always a good reminder. So I'm glad that you share that too. Next is, what's your biggest gaming pet peeve? I figured this would be a good one for you.
Okay. So for me, it is definitely tinnitus sound effects, okay, that that are produced by an explosion, let's say.
Oh, tinnitus.
And
Yeah, yeah.
tinnitus. Oh, sorry, I didn't pronounce it. Tinnitus.
That's okay.
Yeah. So that's because I do suffer from tinnitus myself in real life. So when that happens, I get really stressed. I think, okay, is this an actual flare up? If you're not getting those, you probably cannot relate to me.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But I don't know, maybe something else that is a little bit more relatable is I don't really enjoy beat them up games. I get
Mm,
a little bit bored, and it's a shame because they are pretty, they look retro, but I guess I need more storyline than what those games can offer.
yeah,
And yeah, I don't know, it feels like it's kicking and punching and punching and kicking.
a lot.
But that's just me, maybe.
I know everybody's different. We all have like motivations and reasons and stuff why we play those things. And yeah, I'm gonna digress for a quick moment. That tinnitus thing, I can relate to that when it relates to, and I'm not giving crap to any of the Roblox developers out there, but when my son, my 4-year-old, is playing a Roblox game and then there's extreme overmodulation to the
Mm.
point where I think my surround sound is blowing the speakers, which they could be from him playing that, then I'm not that's a pet peeve of mine. But I get it. We're all learning. So
Okay, okay. So I see that your kids play Roblox too.
yeah, it's a
Hmm.
thing. Grow Gardens
No,
died down a bit, so I'm happy
totally.
about that. But anyways, all right. Last but not least, the staple here on the show is what game are you playing now?
Well, right now I am actually playing Surviving 99 Nights in the Forest with my son.
Yep,
And if you haven't heard of it, it's a survival game in Roblox.
yep, I have.
So I'm enjoying this one because, like I was saying earlier, I find ways to bond with my son. So I'm actually playing this game with him and his 10-year-old friend. So it's fun to belong to a 10-year-old gang. It makes me feel young. But they're really, kids these days are so smart. Really, when we communicate online, they to play the game, they're all about strategy. And in fact, it's a bit lame, but I'm often the one who flops and they have to come revive me. So yeah.
Awesome. Well, I love that you took the time to share that with us, and it's funny. You're like talk about bonding experience. I'm like, oh, my kids bond too. They're just in separate rooms playing the same game, but they live with each other, so it's not like they're just never around. But anyways, no, that's great. I like share what you did, especially that first quote. That was a big one, and I think all of us could like really take to heart and think about. So, but anyways,
Hmm.
now that we went through the Q box round, let's get into the heart of this conversation, which I led in with the intro, folks, which is the impact of QA on the player experience. And as you probably know from different conversations, stuff that I had here, this is like a big thing for me, especially, which is why I was so excited to have Francisca on the show, because we all want to really care and know more about this player experience. So to kind of kick things off, I'm curious, Francisco, what would you say is like the most common myth or stereotype, about QA that you still hear today?
Yeah, so people who haven't heard of QA before, they tend to joke that testers get paid to play games, right? And sure, as you all know, we do, but we do it professionally. We do it with a purpose and with a plan. We don't do it for entertainment, but at least not during working hours, for sure. Testing can be a lot of fun, like any other job, but if you're lucky enough and you are assigned to a game that you really love, it will be the best job in the world, for sure. That's how it will feel. But sometimes we also have to test games that we enjoy less, or we have to test on builds with features that are still very unstable. And those early builds actually look very different from what players will eventually see when the game comes out. And testing also doesn't look like playing at all. For example, um, we focus on specific areas for hours and hours, and we have to do the same thing. Imagine this. So you could have a team assigned to running the same collision paths in an open world zone with no storyline at all. So that can get quite boring. And or instead of doing what a normal user do, which is following the golden path, enjoy the story, the QA team, they need to focus on breaking every possible feature, like, I don't know, backtracking after every checkpoint to see what the game does, For example, this is one thing that I just came up with, but that's why we perform what it's called destructive testing, right?
Mm.
And there is another stereotype too, which is that QA is only there to find bugs. And that is only a portion of what we do during our day. Because two main things about QA are: one, protecting the user experience, and two, reducing risk. So what do we do aside of finding bugs? Well, we do things like building documentation, we validate designs, we make sure that the game performs well on different conditions, real life conditions. And also, another thing that we do pretty much almost on a daily basis, or at least every time that we get a new bill, is verify that any new code changes that have been recently introduced don't break other systems quietly. That's
Yes.
why we do what we call halo testing. If you work in the software industry, you may know this as regression testing. So yeah, we do spend a lot of time on things that players will notice. And that's why we give a lot of feedback and that will actually affect the final player experience. So in other words, so we don't focus only on what is broken. We also ask ourselves further questions like, is it clear? Is it fair? Is it stable? Etc.
Yeah, I like that a lot. And that's a really good final point there because again, we go into these things like, what's QA, what is, game testing and all this stuff, and we think those things. I mean, the biggest one I would always say is if I were to guess what one of those would be, looking for bugs and stuff. And but still that main one right there, I think that you said at the end was, is it clear? Because we often we get so tied up in the experiences and what we've been making and what we're focused on that we can often forget, is it clear? Because guess what, we could be in a way self-sabotaging without realizing it, because it's clear to us, but is it clear to the players? And if we can't answer that a question effectively, that's why having someone else get in there who's that's what they're trained to do, to make that make sure that clarity is there. Because if you're once you get it out and your players don't find it clear, that's going to be really hard to for people who are buying the game. You get bad reviews, could be hard to communicate or market it to people. There's all sorts of things that can happen. I want to kind of explore this a little bit more too, about this, like
Mm-hmm.
this idea of like, hey, you're just a tester, right? Like diving in a little bit more of what those things are, because you shared some great examples. But one thing I'm curious about too is like, when QA is treated differently
Mm-hmm.
from some of those common, myths and stereotypes, like let's say in the way of a strategic partner, right? How does that
Yes.
change the outcome for players if people are leading with that idea about QA as opposed to the other? How does that change the outcome for players?
Yes. Well, the short answer is the outcome will be a smoother gaming experience in general. And I will develop on this a lot. The main reason is because QA insight is especially useful and valuable when it's taken into consideration during the early stages, right? During the early conversations, often during the design phase. But sadly, this is not something that organizations keep in mind enough, in my opinion. So I want to start with an example right away, okay? I was assigned to a project where we were co-developing with another studio and improving features on a game that was already released. One body of work was to develop and integrate a VoIP plugin because the game didn't have a voice over chat. So the deadline of the delivery was really, really tight. I think we had about 2 months.
Hmm.
Every developer, producer, and designer who was part of this initiative was very skilled, except that no one had enough knowledge about compliance testing. Even myself, I have to admit. So we were lucky enough. There was another. Let me say first that we didn't have a lot of time, and usually when you have to develop a feature that has certification requirements, there is a back and forth that you have to do with the first party, right? Asking questions about those requirements, and this can take a very long time. So imagine for VoIP, there are very complex things in the flow. Things like, okay, you have a party with 4 people, but then player A has blocked player B. How does this show for players C and D? things like that. I don't know. Anyway, I'm gonna go a little bit more straight to the point because I've been drifting a bit. We had a person who had managed, it was a person in the QA department who had managed compliance in the past. So what we did was include her in all the Scrum ceremonies. And at the end of the delivery, I can tell you that everyone in the team agreed, production, design, and development, that the reason, at least 60% of the reasons we were able to develop the feature on time was because of this one person.
Hmm.
Because the compliance tester was involved during the design phase. They didn't have to go back and forth and design a feature, realize that there is a requirement that is not met, and do it. Can you imagine the struggle?
Yeah.
So this is a clear example of how treating QA as a strategic partner early during the conversation is success. It translates to success for the whole team. And then there is a point that you mentioned earlier, right? That you said that not all the issues feel the same to everyone. So it's worth pointing out one specific skill that QA people develop, and that is empathy, which it sounds a bit surprising, right? Because when we talk about QA skills, our first thoughts go immediately to analytical skills or
Yeah.
eye to detail, right? But no, there is also an emotional side to all of this that we forget because we're not just a back police. So people who are on QA learn empathy because we put ourselves in the shoes of the user who's going to play the game. So, and I'm about to finish this point now. I recently read a book by Graham McAllister on usability playtesting, and it did tie closely to user experience. So, on this book, he mentions friction points, right? What are friction points? Are any usability issues that will frustrate the user. So, the thing is that these friction points can exist either in the game or in the player's mind, right? And the latter ones are not as obvious. So at the bottom line is that if you treat QA as a strategic partner and include them early during the development cycle, you will find both types of frictions early. What's broken in the product, sure, but also what's happening in the user's mind.
Yeah, I love that so much. Because like I mean, folks, you know it. I mean, empathy is like really the unofficial official theme of this podcast as well. And we see it in all shapes and sizes, and you calling out to that, Francisca, is great because it is a skill, and that's sometimes what I'm often referring to when we're talking here on the show is empathy is about understanding all people invested in the project, whether it's a player, whether it's your team members, whether it's future
Mm-hmm.
partners. It carries in so many ways. And you just gave an excellent example of why that's so important and a very refined and developed skill that like people like you and your team and others out there have developed. That sense of empathy as it relates to that player experience and why it's so important. So I absolutely love how you defined what that looks like in an actual partnership, a strategic one, because hey, look, we don't always have this level of empathy. We're all, I would hope to believe, empathetic people, but we apply this in our own in different ways. So why not lead with someone who has that refined skill set in a particular area? So I love that you called that out. you know I know that we've probably uh can assume here, or some people might think this, that like
Mm.
testers can be called like risk assessment experts, right? But how does like risk thinking directly influence also the quality of that final player experience? Because now we're maybe taking a little bit further and looking at it maybe from a little bit more of an analytical lens. So when we're thinking
Mm-hmm.
about risk, how does that also influence the quality of the player experience too?
Yes, QA teams, they develop project management skills and risk assessment skills too. And we do that as we grow some sort of muscle memory while increasing our professional experience, right? Because we do get to learn where the ugliest issues hide, and then we will try to reproduce the same patterns over and over on different games. Let me give you an example. For example, I'm testing a mobile game, and I open an app while while the game is still running in the background. As a result, the game shuts down immediately instead of doing so gracefully or going into pause menu, which are behaviors that are to be expected more. Well, this is going to serve me as an idea for a test case scenario to verify on my next mobile project. See, so another thing that QA teams have to learn is to juggle a lot of priorities at once. And that is really inherent to the role of a tester. For example, in the morning, we have to install the build, then confirm that the issues have been fixed with every new build. But then imagine you get a long list. So, of course, we better focus on the critical and major bugs because we have other things to do. We have tasks to work on. We have other new bugs to find and report. So, there will be interruptions, other team members asking for help, questions, something not working. Really a mix of things, reports to write at the end of the day. So we we really learn how to prioritize. So that's gonna add to our risk assessment skill. And yeah, earlier we spoke about empathy that testers gain as we learn to put ourselves in the shoes of the user. So because of all these reasons, our QA brains are already wired to hunt first for what it's most likely to hurt the players and not what's in front of us or the easiest thing to test.
Yeah, I like that kind of like that that image. Well, not even that image, but kind of when we were talking about hunting for those specific things and stuff, and that's really cool because it's like and that's exactly the type of support I think a lot of us out there need is the stuff that we're not necessarily looking for or think that's there, and those are the things players are going to find because we know it, right? They go out and it's like I can't duplicate that, but somehow this player happened. Was it because of the computer they're using? Was it because of settings? Who knows, right? And to find those things, and maybe it had nothing to do with those, but still that hunt and going approaching risk assessment in kind of a multifaceted way. You know, speaking of multifaceted, and you actually alluded to this a little bit earlier in another
Mm-hmm.
point. You know, from your perspective, like what does like effective QA collaboration look like in terms of in terms of incorporating design, UX in production, and how does this also help prevent issues that players would may otherwise experience if this type of collaboration wasn't in place? Because sometimes we look at it again as like black and white, but when we're incorporating all these other teams and aspects and elements and stuff, how is that going to really help prevent issues?
Yes, it all comes down to good communication at the end of the day. That's the success key to any project, right? And yeah, when we talk about communication, well, first, frequency matters. Of course, I'd say it is important to sync up regularly to be aligned. Again, let me give you another example. When I was working at this co-development studio, we had a project where the design kept changing and we had to go through constant reapproval cycles. There wasn't really anything that we could do about that. But the bottom line was the QA lead, sorry, could not be present in many of these meetings. So again, by the way, this was not necessarily design department fault. It was, I believe what happened is that no one had designated a person who was accountable of building the communication pipeline, but this resulted in QA writing wrong test cases and reporting invalid bugs, right? So again, this was because of communication, because not everyone was part of the conversation, because the pipeline wasn't established. So yeah, from this experience, that is what I learned. There are two things. One, make sure that communication is solid, that the enough channels exist, and make sure that every craft is represented and part of the conversation about alignment. And sadly, the craft, which is often not involved early enough, is QA. So please include QA early if you can. We spoke, I did mention pipelines and communication, but the way we deliver these communications is also important, right? Because message had to be clear and concise, yes, but most importantly, again, empathetic. because each craft is focused often on different things, and we don't always succeed at seeing the full picture of the constraints that others are working under, if you know what I mean. So, yeah, for example, development is focusing on making sure that the systems work.
Right. Yeah.
Design may be focusing on how the UI feels. QA wants the game to be as clean as possible. But at the end of the day, what we need to make sure is that everything works as a whole, right? So
Exactly.
at the end of the day, if any area is forced to sacrifice too much, then players will feel it in one way or another. And that can be through delays, through bugs, poor user experience, or systems that don't behave as intended.
Absolutely. And another way to look at this, folks, too, and how I kind of see it is, you know, every we the conversation or the idea and concept of silos. And it's
Mm-hmm.
within those silos that we start to remove empathy, right? Because we're just so focused in our own spaces. And when we have communication, it's hard to maybe translate or understand what the others are doing, or how it relates to that whole cohesive project. And silos exist in all spaces, whether they're big studios, agencies, or even just smaller projects. Because the other part too is even on indie projects, a lot of times I'm sure a lot of us, keep all this information in our head. And even though, but when you do get other people involved, it's like lots of information siloed within you, and depending on how that is communicated and what format and everything else, it still can make that process really tricky. So I love those examples and everything else, and how it's great because you see this in a very specific way. And from what I see it too is like I see the specific perspective, which is great, but also how even universally this applies across all areas in what we're doing too. So it's just it's just interesting how these can be applicable in numerous cases, essentially. But regardless of what we're talking about. But anyways, we're here to talk about QA. So, um, I love that you shared that. And one other thing I'm kind of curious too is how else you know QA protects the user journey and everything. And let me elaborate a little bit further. So we already kind of dug into the aspect and things like risk and bug finding and all that stuff. But what about other applications or use cases? Let's say I know we talked a little bit about UX clarity, but what about like onboarding flow or accessibility and things like that? Like, because again, these are all there is. Maybe even like a tutorial, right? Who knows? But
Mm-hmm.
how are some ways that QA can help protect these elements and these aspects too, when maybe we don't see it because we're just so focused on what our core responsibility is?
Yes, well, there's a lot to cover. We can think of a video game as a conversation, right, between the player at the game that keeps going
Ooh, I
on
like
and
that.
on as a loop. So QA testers make sure that that conversation is properly understood and enjoyable from the start, right? So let's imagine that the loop starts from the main menu. So the player has to read all the options, make a decision, decide which game mode they want to play. To do that, there are many things we need to make sure that are happening properly. So the player has to be able to understand. Then they have to be able to navigate properly. Also, they need to be able to receive proper feedback. So it's a bunch of factors that we need to keep into consideration, and many things that can result in that feedback or information getting distorted. So imagine things like legibility of the text. Is the text big enough? Is it blurry? Maybe there isn't enough contrast with the background,
Mm,
which affects readability. So, all those things are not necessarily bugs, but are design issues, right? That we need to flag as well. And then we have localization too, where the message can get lost in translation, or I don't know, some text might be in fact translated properly, but they maybe not convey the right message.
yeah.
It's a lot of things that you need to look into. So that's one thing. Then if we, let's say, imagine about controls, right? That's very important to make sure
Mm,
that controls feel good. We, as QA, we can provide a lot of feedback on how the controls actually feel, even if we're not talking necessarily bugs, because that can be an important irritator. Let me give you an example. I was once assigned to a big MMO project where there were more commands than physical buttons in the controller, right?
Yeah.
That happens often, especially with big games, with
Mm.
MMO. So design had a very hard time assigning functionalities to commands. So at some point, I don't know how it happened, but we ended using D-pad down to open a quick menu, which is weird. You usually would not use that. And left face button, so square on the PlayStation controller, to do melee attacks. However, we were using R2, the right trigger, for long range attacks. So in the moment, design wasn't really thinking. They were doing what they could. Basically, there's a free space here. Let's assign the functionality because we can. But then when QA got their hands on the game, they said, "Hey, this feels weird. It doesn't feel natural to have to press keypad down to open a menu while all the other menus open differently, or then I'm shooting and my the two buttons are so far apart. It just does not feel natural." So because of that, we ended up QA ended up raising the issue. We had to go through an additional control mapping design approval cycle, but it was worth it because players for sure wouldn't appreciate things like that.
Yeah, I love that you call those things out too, because I mean, if you think about it, there's certain player behavior as it comes down to the mechanical motions that they're familiar with and stuff, and making a big change like that, and like I'm sure
Mm-hmm.
Fortnite, for example, has done plenty of QAing and stuff, but for me, still, as a much older person than my kids that play the game, man, that feels like a nightmare when it comes to all the different settings and everything. But I mean, I'm sure they worked it out because I see kids doing it like I don't know how. They're smart, like you said.
Yeah,
Um,
they are. Let me, you mentioned tutorials, and
oh yeah, yeah,
so sorry, I'll go on for a little bit longer because, like I said, there's so much to cover. You mentioned onboarding and tutorials, right? And they might be. You did say that they might be clear for the person who wrote the tutorials because they
right.
know the game inside out, but they may not be clear enough for the user who is seeing the game for the first time. That's why we include first-time user test cases in our testing plan. So sometimes one single piece of information may be really, really crucial. And I wanted to talk also about not just about access usability, but accessibility, right?
Mm.
Which is usability for everyone. And I wanted to mention a post that I read the other day on LinkedIn. Um, it really touched me. And too bad that I don't remember the name of the game, but it had voice chat transcriptions. And there was a woman, a mother of two kids. She's deaf, and she mentioned in her post that thanks to the live captions, she was able to understand her children saying, "Mom, run, there's a huge spider behind you." She said, "I died, but it made me feel included." So I just love that.
Yeah, and I think that's a great one right there because there's so many of these moments you've heard me talk about in different capacities. This aspect of memorable moments, right, in games.
Mhm.
But the thing is, they're so nuanced. They're so like very specific, and this one is one of them. But still, it's like for that person, that's this is such a memorable moment with their kids and everything. And even though it's yes for a mom, she might not be going on Reddit to talk about it. It's those types of experiences that can really spread like word of mouth and all these other things. And even if they don't, it's just fulfilling to know that. I mean, and here we are talking about it now because it really stood out to you, especially from like a QA perspective. You're like, yeah, that is like probably awesome QA happened right there. And what a great story to go with it. Right. So it's awesome. Again, these memorable moments happen in all different places. And the more of those that we are able to create, the more accessibility, the more people will enjoy the games and that experience, and the better that they're likely to do.
That's right.
I
Spot on.
such a good story. Well, I know we're coming on time here, so what I want to kind of conclude is, and I think we kind of like set this stage quite well here, but based off of everything we talked about and stuff, what would you say is kind of the cost of bringing in something like QA in too late? And does early involvement really change that experiences that we're trying to create for players?
Yes, I will firstly talk about the cost for the studio and as a result, how this will impact the user experience because players will not experience that QA was brought in too late, but what they will experience is the symptoms, right? So late cost is sorry, if you bring QA, if you find a QA early, imagine it's so easy, right? You change the design, you update a rule, you tweak, and you can fix those bugs fairly quickly, right? But if you bring QA late, now the same bug is tied into code, UI, content. So it turns out into rework, retesting, and new bugs and reworking. So it will be a lot more costly if QA finds bugs later when we're reaching the release. So yeah, in terms of money and effort, fixing a bug can when it's close to our when we're close to our release, it can be even 10 times more costly than fixing it during the early development phases. And yeah, so you ask what's the cost for the player, right? Well, it's it's indirectly because if the team runs out of time and or money, they will have to make some trade-offs, and that can result in either delaying the game or ship the game in time but with bugs, clear or onboarding flows that are not clear, and I don't know, in general a lower level of polish, I would say.
Oh yeah, I can think of lots. But yeah, delayed, delayed release could have a poor release, poor
Mm-hmm.
reception, negative reviews, refunded sales, lack of any type of like future coverage because of that type of attention. Basically, if you want to really sum it up, I think it's a lack of opportunity costs, whether it's from a development or even marketing perspective too. Even if like, hey, it wasn't that as a hit as it could have been because these things are missed, that might reduce business development opportunities with publishers or other types of partners or opportunities. The list I think could go on and on and on. In whether you're hiring someone or not, those costs are real and they compound in the end. Whether if you're implementing these things right away, they can go up, and if you're not, they can go down. I know I boil it down to a lot. There's probably lots of nuances, but yeah, that's
Yeah,
the way I would see it, anyways. And I'm sure you could see a lot of those similarities and reasons why those types of scenarios would exist too. It's crazy.
I agree.
Well, I know we're definitely on time here, and oh my goodness, I feel like we could have really dove in on so much
we,
more, but there's only so much we
that's
could talk
right.
about in QA. So, based off our conversation, what tips, suggestions would you have as maybe takeaways or something for our listeners today?
Okay. Yeah, so based on what we spoke today, I will say three things. Firstly, focus on usability and accessibility as well. Like I said earlier, accessibility is usability for everyone. Don't consider this as a nice to have. These are actually retention factors because every
Mm.
confusing menu, unreadable UI, or difficulty, it's a moment where players will stop feeling in control and will begin feeling those friction points that we mentioned earlier, right? Then another advice is please include QA in your production cycle. Even if you have a small indie team or if you are a solo dev, there are processes that are a little bit more lightweight that you can consider. So there are solutions that fit everyone that range from hiring a small team or externalizing if you have a precise need during a development peak period. Yeah, and if you don't know where to start, I would say just talk to anyone on LinkedIn who is in QA. People in QA, they love helping others and they really value when other people ask for their expertise. So don't be shy about that. And yeah, and well, tied to my previous point, last but not least, please include QA early. Uh, even even if it's just a QA lead and not necessarily a full team, this will really save you money and effort in the long run. And yeah, I will say that that is all. There
Okay.
is a summary
And I'm
of
sure we'll save you pain too and frustration. So,
yes.
Francisca, I can't thank you enough. Before we go, where can people connect with you to whether it's chat or find more about your company, Hewas? Yeah, please drop us some links.
I will definitely. Mostly on LinkedIn, and I will make sure to drop the links, Omar,
Oh yeah,
to so
we'll
that they're
definitely
access.
include the links in the show notes. But again, is it just whois.com for the
Yes,
website?
it's whois.com.
All right, excellent. Well, Francisca, I can't thank you enough. This has been great. Glad that we got to have this conversation because it's an important one, and there's a lot at risk, and hopefully we addressed on ways that we can, all of us can, whether big or small, can address that risk. So again, thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks to you. I really enjoyed it.
Hey everyone, thank you for listening to another episode of Indie Game Movement. I'm Andrew Pappas, your host, and the show's producer is Mustafa Price. Show notes for this episode can be found by visiting rengenmarketing.com, the number episode of the show. Rengen Marketing is a consulting marketing company that helps indie devs with their marketing efforts. Whether you need guidance with your game's marketing strategy or could use a free marketing plan template, then please visit www.rengenmarketing.com and take action. A special thanks to Dakota Saw for Season 2's opening theme and Melissa Gellis for the new logo design. And as always, thanks for being such great listeners, and we'll see you next time on Indie Game Movement.